Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name is LJ and you're watching NoClutchGarage. Today's video is going to be a small discussion about some things that are going on in the B58 world right now, particularly with fuel pumps. I've been seeing this all over the place for about 2-3 weeks now, or whenever the latest spool pumps were released, right? They released a new series of pumps that obviously are better than the last pumps that they had. And so I think when that started happening, we saw a lot of offerings pop up. We saw the offerings from XDI, and then we started seeing aftermarket injectors from Nordstrom, from XDI, from Spool, and then we started seeing cams from Skunk 2. We started seeing cams from Spool, from Dorch Engineering. And so today I want to talk a little bit about that whole topic, but I'm going to be focusing in on Dorch Engineering. And the reason why I'm focusing on Dorch Engineering is because that's what I have on my car. That's what I use. That's the company that early on I decided that I wanted to stick with, because over the years, they've always had the best customer service. They've always done me right. I was one of the early adopters when the pumps first came out. And you know, I bought the pump and then I loved it. I loved the customer service. I started talking to Chris a lot more. We started dealing back and forth, and you know, I just have a good relationship with that company. So today I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Dorch Engineering and some of the misinformation that's out there. I know that this has been a sore subject for Chris himself, because there have been other people out there that put out information and don't really thoroughly research it. And so I made it a point to actually speak with him and make sure that the information that I was putting out was accurate. Mainly because, well, for one, I don't want to put out false information, right? Like I don't think it's my job to put out all the information out there, but it's also not my job to misinform people. And whenever I do put information out, I do like to be accurate. And there's been times when I've even had to pull my own videos because some of the information in those videos was not accurate. That's just one of those things that I like to have a good understanding of the things, of the tools, of the parts that I'm using, and not mess up and not mislead people. That's one of the things that I've been very adamant about ever since I started YouTube, and really in life, because even in my profession, I'm in IT, but I do QA work. You know, like it's one of those things where like analysis, data analytics, all those things come into play, and it's important to have the right information, right? And so with Dorch Engineering, I started talking to Chris. We started talking about a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about here in a minute years ago. And so some of the parts that are being released now, I know for a fact have been in development for a couple of years. I knew about the high pressure fuel pump upgrade even like a year ago. And I knew about the cam upgrades, I would say probably about a year ago. No, probably about 2 years ago as well. And so some of the developments that I'm going to be talking about, I know have been in development for a few years. This is one of those things where like, if you are truly in development of these parts, you want the data to be as accurate as possible. You're going to be going through testing as much as possible. As someone that's in the field in testing and doing some things like that, you know, my background lends me to believe any particular person that says they've tested this and that, depending on their results and how they approach the situation, there's a standard procedure for testing things accurately and making sure that you measure things precisely and that the results can be repeated. And so that's one of the things that I really like about Dorch Engineering, is they do test all of the things that they make. And so let's go ahead and jump into it, because I don't want to ramble too much. But essentially, Dorch Engineering announced today and yesterday a new line of pumps. So the new line of pumps replaces the Dorch Stage 1 and the Dorch Stage 2, and changes it to the Dorch Stage 25-250 and the Dorch Stage 15-250. Sorry for all that, it's a mouthful. But there's a reason for why they're named that, right? And so the Dorch 1 became the Dorch 15. And so the Stage 1 is essentially 1.5, but they just didn't put the period in it, so it's 15. And then the Dorch Stage 2 is 25, it's 2.5, but they didn't put the decimal in there. And so that's essentially what that breakdown's like. And then the dash 250 denotes the operating pressure, so 250 bar. So for these pumps, you can run them up to 250 bar, which is well over the 250 bar that the previous ones operated at. And the reason for that is you want to have that extra flow, that extra pressure, that extra fuel sealing, so that you can more precisely and accurately feed the injectors, the aftermarket injectors that you're going to be putting on there later. And so let's keep this in mind, right? Because there are other pumps out there that can probably operate at the same pressure, but this is not just like a GM pump. And it's funny because I was having a discussion about this earlier in the week and then earlier today about these pumps. So these pumps, they're made by a company called Steridyne, and that company builds the pumps for a lot of different companies. The thing with Steridyne is, though, you can't just go to them and buy a pump from them. Anything that you build, anything that you want produced by them has to go through a process of development. And the development is done, obviously, with the help of Steridyne, because they're the ones actually building the pump. And of course, then you have the specs of whatever engineering firm that's going to be hiring them. So these Dorch Engineering pumps are not GM pumps. They're Steridyne pumps that GM also happens to use. And because the LT4 motor uses these pumps, everybody calls them GM pumps. They're very common. The internals are not the same. The internals are actually re-engineered from company to company. So Dorch Engineering does their own thing, Spool does their own thing. Everybody has different specs, right? And so Dorch Engineering used to give out the CC per rev figure, but they don't do that anymore. They decided that they would just rather let the results speak for themselves, and I tend to agree with that because sometimes that figure alone can be misleading. And we've seen this before with other aftermarket pumps that don't really perform as well as advertised. And so I think that's one of the things that Dorch is trying to avoid with that. So the DS15 has about a 19% increased flow at the lower ranges, so around 2000 RPM. And then in the higher upper ranges, they have about an 11%, 10% increase in flow. This equates to almost what the old DS2 was. And I'll have some of those charts up here on the screen for you to look at. All of this information can be found on the website. Everything that I'm going through can be found on the website, except for some stuff that I'm probably going to be paraphrasing from my conversations with Chris. But essentially, there's going to be about a 10% increase at the top end on the stage 1. So what does that mean for the stage 2? That means that for the stage 25 or the DS25, that increase is actually a 20% to 25% increase down low at the 2000 RPM range. And then when you start getting up in the higher revs, over 7,000, 6,500, basically redline, you're going to be at about a 15% increase. Now, I know that number in itself doesn't sound like a lot, but marginal gains like that, and I wouldn't really call this marginal, but it's a small number. Small gains like this actually can make a lot of difference. And one of the things that Dorch Engineering is doing that I've seen other companies do and are gonna do soon, or that I know they're gonna do soon, is they're basically creating an ecosystem. And you can kind of think of this the way Apple does their whole thing with their devices, right? They have, the iPhone, they have the Mac, they have an iPad, and all three use the same software and they talk to each other and stuff like that. So that's kind of what Dorch Engineering is doing, which is kind of intuitive and ingenious, but they're building a whole ecosystem of hardware that's going to work with each other. So right now we have these new pumps, and then we have the cams that just came out, which I do have right there, and then they're gonna be having later on injectors and God knows what else, but I know that stuff is coming. I caught wind of the cams a while back when Chris and I were having a conversation. He was talking about the lift kit for the M55 and S55. If you've ever seen the M55 or S55 engine, then you know that those fuel pumps are at the bottom of the engine, but they're being spun by a very small cam. And so the cam, it's a small unit that you can just take off the car, because you can literally just take that unit off, send it off, they do whatever, or they send you a unit and then you send the core back. And that's really easy, right? Relatively easy. But on B58, you actually have to do head work. You have to take off the valve cover, you have to take off the exhaust cam, and then for just, if you're just doing the fuel side of things, that's all you need to do. The exhaust cam, swap out, and that's it. And that's because Dorch offers a variety of upgrades. So for their cams, they have just what they call the B58 lift kit, which is basically a stock exhaust cam with a bigger fuel lobe. And that fuel lobe is going to allow a 40% increase in flow. That is huge. So if we really think about it, you're going to have that 15% increase from the DS2 to the DS25 plus 40% increase from the fuel lobe. And I think that's crazy. That's over 50% fuel increase. It's good though. It's good that they're doing that. I really like the idea of having parts from the same company work together seamlessly And so all the figures that Dorch has posted on their website are figures that they're basing off of with their products. So for example, that 40% increase, that cam lobe size increase is designed to work with the DS25 or the DS2, so Dorch products. And so I have a suspicion that in the future, when they do release injectors, those injectors are going to work with the specifications from the pump and the cam. So yeah, exciting stuff coming up from Dorch Engineering. On their cam side of things, they have several offerings, as I mentioned a little bit ago, but they have the lift kit, which we just talked about, and then they have 3 stages of cams that they partnered up with Kelford Cams, which Kelford, they're a great company for cams. They're known in motorsports, they're really well known everywhere really, and so they teamed up with Dorch. So they made the cams, the cam profiles, so they have A, B, and C cams, and then you have the option of adding the Dorch cam if you want. So Dorch offers them on their website, and they have just a standalone B58 lift kit, and then they have another section where you can just get the cams, and you can choose whether you want it with the fuel lobe or not, or what have you. So obviously we start with the A cam, which is what I have back here in the box. The A cam is the lightest of the cams, and then you have a B cam, which is going to give you a little bit more top end, and then you have a C cam, which is more akin to like a race cam in race cars. And so there's basically a stage for everybody, right? And so I wouldn't recommend everybody to just go and get this stuff. Obviously, if you have port injection, maybe the lift kit doesn't make sense, because you might get a little bit more out of that direct injection fuel pump, but really you can just increase ice in the injectors on your PI and you would gain, you know, just as much fueling from it. Now, some people prefer DI over PI. There's that whole discussion, but I'm not going to open that can of worms because I already know how broad of a discussion that can get. So if you're planning on going DI only and you just want to stay DI, the cam and the pump is probably a good idea for you. And the only downside of that is that even though they are drop-in cams, you still have to do head work. You still have to open up the valve cover, make sure the timing is fixed and nothing moves. You have to know how to do that. So it's not just a simple DIY. I will probably be filming it as I will do the DIY, but I would say for the average consumer, don't try it because it's gonna be hard. Regardless, as I said, I'm gonna be doing the DIY, so you'll be able to see that. I'm also gonna be doing a video unboxing of the cams and a video unboxing of the fuel pump. And actually, I have the fuel pump with me. This is the new DS25. It looks exactly like the DS2, except for this fitting right here. And this is one of the changes physically that is happening with this pump, where this is actually going to allow for the AN line to have a 45-degree angle elbow so that it doesn't get in the way of cylinder 5. I know that's been one of the complaints with the previous iteration of the pump. And so we won't have that issue anymore. And actually, let me show you the difference side by side. Look here in the engine bay, you're gonna see the pump that's right there. This is the protrusion that gets in the way of things and people really don't like. But with the new pump, you're actually gonna have that protrusion come away from there. So you're gonna see this pump, it's gonna be pretty much like this, and then the line is gonna come in from the back, so it's gonna be completely away from cylinder 5. So that's gonna make it easier to work on your car if you gotta do like a tune-up, change your coils and plugs, and just a little quality of life improvement. And so in conclusion, when we're talking about these Gen 1 pumps, it's not necessary for you to switch out from a DS2 to DS25 if that's what you have. If you don't have any of these upgrades, a DS25 is a great option because you're going to have a lot of headroom, especially if you plan on leaning into the DI aspect of things. So if you're wanting to lean into DI, you don't want to mess with PI at all, now you have the option to just stay with DI, with the OEM programming, with the ECU calibration. You can just add bigger injectors, a cam, and a bigger pump, and you'll be making a lot of power. I know, for example, David Shoup, who I talked to, and he's not my tuner, but we have a good relationship. He shared some of the information from the testing that he did on the spool kit, which is basically the cam and the pump, and he got some really good numbers out of it. So we're seeing that these cars are now able to put out numbers that weren't possible before with DI only, that previously required port injection. And so on that side is really exciting, and I'm sure it makes it easier for tuners to not have to hassle with the addition of PI and reflex and all this other stuff. So if you want to keep your build simple, you can lean into DI. It might be more expensive or just as expensive, really, but you won't have to mess with PI at all. So that's one of the benefits with all these kits coming out. Now let's move on to a little bit of bigger news, because the cams is big news, the new pumps are big news, and perhaps the biggest news out of all of this that's going on right now is actually the introduction of the DS25-350. Now, earlier we talked about the nomenclature of these pumps, the DS25 clearly indicating 2.5. In this case, it doesn't really apply, but it's the DS25 regardless, I think just for simplicity purposes. And then the dash 350 is 350 bar. So if we convert these units, the DS2, the Dorch Stage 2, operated at 200 bar, which is what the stock Gen 1 high pressure fuel system operates at. It operates at about 3000 psi, which is 200 bar, which is also the same pressure at which the LT4 operates. And I think that's where a lot of that GM pump fiasco came from, and so I'm glad we already cleared that up. But the 350 is actually closer to 5000 psi, and that's the operating pressure of the high pressure fuel system on the Gen 2 cars, the BMW Gen 2 cars. So the Supra, M340, the new M240, all the new cars, they operate at 350 bar. So it is a larger pressure threshold, but that does not mean that you can put a 350 on a Gen 1 car. You should not. They don't operate the same way. That's the same reason why the Gen 2 cars didn't have a high pressure fuel pump upgrade for a long time. That's why the Supra up until now, up until today, doesn't have an upgrade available. And I suspect, and I think actually, there is another company that is releasing the Stage 2 pump for, or the pump upgrade for the Gen 2 cars. That'll include the Supra, the new Z4, and all the other Gen 2 cars, as I've stated already. Now this is significant because I think this is one of those pumps that actually took a little bit of engineering, and one of the reasons that Dorch Engineering hadn't released it is for their thorough testing. They've had a lot of this stuff already figured out for a while, but you got to test things thoroughly before you put them out there in the mass market, especially if you want to retain your status as, you know, having a really good reputation and having really good customer service. It's very important for serious companies like that. Quick glance at the DS25-350, its flow potential on gasoline is 770 wheel horsepower, and its flow potential on the 85 is 560 wheel horsepower. So as you can see, not much difference between the DS250 and the 350 because they're operating at different pressures, and so that means you can get the same amount of power at different pressures. It just depends how your fuel system is set up. And so you can put a 350 on a Gen 1, you can't put a 250 on a Gen 2. Do not try it, please, because I see a lot of people in the comments that are getting excited about this and thinking about putting the 350 on the Gen 1. It's not going to work. Don't do it. Don't waste your money, and don't potentially damage your car. Okay, it's not going to run right. So those were the figures, and I'll post this up on the screen, and I'll also include everything I'm talking about. I'll include it in the description down below, including links to the products, and you can just purchase them from there. There's also another column where they're showing all the data that shows the DS25-350 with a 27% cam upgrade. Now, this is not a product that has officially been talked about, but since Dorch Engineering already put it on the site, I might as well just touch upon it a little bit. But with the upcoming cam upgrade from Dorch Engineering, you're going to have something similar to what's going on with the Gen 1s right now, except instead of 40%, you're going to have a 27% increase. Okay, and it's actually a math calculation. So at the peak of the lobe on a Gen 1 cam, it's 5 millimeters, and on the Gen 2 is 5.5. And so the Dorch cams are 7 millimeters, so they increase that from 5 to 7. And if you divide 7 by 5, you get 1.40, and then that 40 is basically the over 100, which is the 40% increase. So that's how you get that calculation. So then if you do the same thing with the Gen 2 cams, you do 7 divided by 5.5, you're going to get 1.27 repeating, and that's where the 27% comes from. And so you're going to get a 27% increase in flow, and that is going to come up to 950 wheel horsepower on gasoline potential flow, and then potential flow on fully 85 of 710 wheel horsepower with just a pump upgrade. And obviously operating pressure 350 bar. So since Dorch Engineering already has a really good reputation with the Gen 1 cars, I have no doubt that the Gen 2 cars are going to benefit greatly from this and have a really reliable pump that won't give them issues and will increase their DI output. You know, one of the biggest hurdles right now for the Gen 2 cars is the injectors. Those injectors are tiny. They're actually a lot smaller than the Gen 1 injectors, and this is something that I've touched up on before on my Whiskey Wednesdays and also in group chats and in the forums talking to other people. A lot of the information that I have and that I know, I don't actually publicly release, and it's not because I don't want to. A lot of times I don't, because some of that is IP that I'm told way before any of these products come out, and so I just don't talk about it. Other information is just information that I get from people like tuners, like engineers and stuff like that, and I'm very about the very small details. And so having this kind of information for me, like, I nerd out a little bit, but I know for the average consumer, what matters is that you're gonna get a better pump, you're gonna get better flow, and you're gonna get the reliability that you know and that you love from Dorch Engineering. So guys, that is all I really wanted to talk to you about today, because I kept seeing these posts everywhere and I see other companies pumping out their products as well. There's a lot of good competition going on right now, and competition is really good. If you know anything about anything, if you know anything about the industry, about advancement in technology in general, is that competition drives competition, and competition drives innovation. And so whenever there are multiple companies competing to make the same product, there's bound to be some innovation somewhere. And so the fact that we're getting upgrades from both Dorch and Spool and new products from other companies, like, that just means that we're reaching a point where, like, now we can build off of the stuff that's already been built. And yes, a few years later, but I think there's also been a whole lot of research being done independently and by big shops that is helping everybody drive this competition and innovate even more. So this is good for everybody, honestly. And I know that I'm talking more specifically about Dorch Engineering, but honestly, there's a lot of good products coming out from a lot of companies. So guys, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop those questions down in the comment section down below. I'll be able to answer them there, or you can DM me online. I don't really post in the forums much anymore, just because I don't have the time, and I would rather just make videos like this. I will be posting this in some groups, so if you guys see this, this is my take based on my experience, based on the data presented, and based on my conversations with Chris Dorchester himself. I make sure that all the data that I'm giving out to you is accurate. I double check it with him, and you know, if it green lights me, I go ahead and drop it for you guys to understand what's actually going on. So hope you found this informative. I know I rambled a lot, but I feel like a lot of this information needed to be said. If you want to see more videos like this where I go over products and explain how they work, or certain aspects of them besides just the usual installation and unboxing, go ahead and tell me down in the comment section down below, and I'll be glad to, you know, pick some products here and there that I can expand upon a little bit more for you guys. So thank you very much. Talk to you later. Peace.